Three bombshells. Three separate, genuinely shocking, absolutely cannot be ignored pieces of information that Brian Schottenheimer dropped at the NFL owners' meetings in Phoenix on March 30th, 2026. And every single one of them landed on the Dallas Cowboys fan base like a grenade thrown into a quiet room. Not because they were unexpected in isolation, not because any single one of them, taken alone, out of context, stripped of everything surrounding it, would necessarily generate the kind of reaction that has Cowboys Twitter melting down, and Cowboys radio going to back-to-back caller segments, and Cowboys analysts publishing pieces with words like alarm and concern and double-edged sword in the very first paragraph. But because all three landed on the same day, from the same man, at the same league meetings, and together as a complete picture of what is actually happening inside the Dallas Cowboys organization right now, 23 days before the draft that is supposed to fix everything that went wrong in a 7-9 first year for Schottenheimer, they tell a story that every Cowboys fan in America needs to hear completely. Because this story is not just about one contract dispute, or one coaching preference, or one personal situation. It is about a franchise standing at a crossroads that it has been approaching for years, and that March 30th, 2026 has now brought into unmistakably sharp focus. Let's go through them, one by one, because each one deserves its full treatment. The first bombshell, George Pickens. The most explosive, most physically gifted, most statistically productive wide receiver on the Dallas Cowboys roster. The man who just put up 93 receptions, 1,429 yards, and 9 touchdowns in the 2025 season, a career best. The man who Schottenheimer himself has described as one of the most talented receivers he has ever worked with. The man who the Cowboys franchise tagged for $27.3 million in February, rather than signing to the long-term deal that everyone, Pickens, his representation, his teammates, the entire Dallas fan base, was expecting. And what did Schottenheimer say about Pickens at the owners' meetings? He's going great. He and CD have been taking a lot of trips together. He's training with Dak. Look, GP loves it here. We love GP. We have plans for GP to be here for a long time. Heavy sports. Beautiful, warm, enthusiastic, the kind of statement that any receiver would love to hear from his head coach. And then, immediately after all of that warmth, all of that affection, all of that we love GP energy, Schottenheimer confirmed the thing that every Cowboys insider has been dreading since the franchise tag was placed on Pickens 6 weeks ago. He has been given no assurance that Pickens will participate in Dallas's voluntary off-season program, Pro Football Network. No assurance from a receiver who just had his best season, who just set career highs in every meaningful statistical category, who just proved definitively over 17 games that he is one of the 3 or 4 most dangerous receivers in the entire NFC. That receiver has not told his head coach he will show up for voluntary workouts, has not signed the franchise tag, has not agreed to a long-term extension, and the reason, the undeniable, mathematically inescapable reason that every Cowboys fan already understands, even if nobody is saying it out loud directly, is that the word voluntary is doing an enormous amount of work in that sentence. While Schottenheimer tried to downplay the entire situation, fans unfortunately know that this is typically how messy contract sagas start. It starts with a star player not attending voluntary activities and eventually evolves into them skipping mandatory things like training camp. Pro Football Network. Cowboys fans know this because they have lived it. They have watched the Dez Bryant contract standoff. They have watched the Ezekiel Elliott holdout. They have watched the Amari Cooper situation. They have watched Micah Parsons get traded, the most seismic roster move in recent franchise history, after a relationship between player and organization that had become visibly, undeniably strained. They have seen every version of this movie. And the opening scene of every version is exactly what Schottenheimer just described. Star player, No long-term deal, no assurance of voluntary attendance, head coach using optimistic language while an alarm is quietly, steadily ringing in the background. Ian Rappaport of NFL Network reported in February that Pickens is unlikely to report to the team's facility until a multi-year deal is finalized. The uncertainty has led to speculation that Dallas could go for a tag-and-trade scenario. Heavy sports. Tag and trade. Those three words. The scenario that Cowboys fans absolutely do not want to be thinking about. The idea that George Pickens, who just set career highs, who is 24 years old, who is entering what should be the absolute prime of his receiving career, might be in a Cowboys uniform for exactly one final year before being shipped away for draft capital that the team uses to rebuild a different area of the roster. The same move they made with Cooper. The same move they made with Parsons. The Cowboys building through trades of their own stars rather than building through sustained development of the players they have. And the possibility, not confirmed, not certain, but real, is sitting right there in Rappaport's February reporting, confirmed by the fact that Schottenheimer is standing in a podium in Phoenix saying he has been given no assurances. And here is what makes the Pickens situation even more complicated, even more specifically alarming for Cowboys fans who understand the full roster picture. George Pickens is on the non-exclusive franchise tag right now, which means Dallas has him for 2026 unless something crazy happens. It does not automatically solve the long-term future of the position. Dogs by nature. The long-term future of the position, because CeeDee Lamb is also not a permanent solution to the long-term receiver question. Lamb is extraordinary, one of the best receivers in football, a future Hall of Famer in the making, the kind of player you build a franchise around. But he is one player, and the history of football tells us that you cannot win championships with one receiver, no matter how good that receiver is. You need a 1 and a 2. You need Lamb and Pickens, or Lamb and somebody else. And if Pickens leaves, whether via trade this summer or via free agency after this season, the Cowboys have to find that somebody else. In a receiver market that is already depleted, in a draft class that has limited elite receiver options, in an organizational context where the draft capital that might be used to trade for a star receiver was already spent acquiring Pickens in the first place. But the Pickens bombshell, as significant and as alarming as it is, was only the first of what Schottenheimer delivered on March 30th. Because then came the quarterback situation and the information that dropped about Dak Prescott's personal life, information that Schottenheimer had to address at the owners' meetings, whether he wanted to or not, is the kind of thing that raises questions far beyond football. 3 weeks ago, news broke that Dak Prescott and Sarah Jane Ramos called off their wedding only a month before they were set to tie the knot. The two reportedly got into a heated argument and scrapped the wedding during their joint bachelor and bachelorette party in the Bahamas. It was subsequently reported that Ramos had caught Prescott using burner accounts on social media to communicate with other women. Prescott and Ramos have 2 daughters. Dogs by nature. The wedding was a month away. They had 2 daughters together. And at the joint bachelor and bachelorette party in the Bahamas, the celebration that was supposed to be the last big event before the biggest commitment of their lives, the relationship ended, not quietly, not privately, in the most public, most dramatically reported, most widely discussed way possible. And then the details about the burner accounts, and then the aftermath, that Dak Prescott, the face of the Dallas Cowboys franchise, the quarterback who is supposed to lead this team out of a 7-9 first year under Schottenheimer and back into playoff contention in 2026, has been navigating publicly.
And Schottenheimer's job at the owners' meetings was to address this, to tell the football world how his quarterback is doing, to reassure, as much as any head coach can reassure about a player's personal life, that the turmoil off the field is not going to become turmoil on it. Dak and I have had a ton of conversations, Schottenheimer said. Despite the difficult personal life circumstances, Prescott appears to be in a good mental state. At least that's what Schottenheimer told reporters at the meetings. Dogs by nature. A ton of conversations, good mental state, the language of a head coach managing a situation that is bigger than football. And credit to Schottenheimer for being present, for being the kind of head coach who has conversations with his players about their lives, not just their play, for building the culture of hard conversations and honest communication that Jerry Jones praised after the first season. But the reality of what Prescott is dealing with, a broken engagement, 2 daughters in the middle of it, the personal relationship collapse playing out in the tabloids while he is supposed to be preparing for the most important season of his Cowboys career, does not disappear because the head coach says his mental state is good. Because here is what every Cowboys fan is thinking, even the ones who are not saying it. Dak Prescott's best seasons have come when his personal life has been stable, when he was locked in, when the noise around him was manageable and the focus was entirely on football. And right now, 3 weeks after one of the most dramatic, most publicly documented relationship collapses in recent NFL history, the noise is not manageable. It is everywhere. And the 2026 season opener is 5 months away. And then the third bombshell, the one that paradoxically contains the most football optimism of anything Schottenheimer said on March 30th, but that also raises the most interesting, most franchise-defining questions about where the Cowboys are going with the draft capital they have and the defensive need they cannot ignore. Speaking at the NFL owners' meetings in Phoenix, Schottenheimer discussed the Cowboys' need at nickel cornerback. He made it very clear that the Cowboys prefer to keep all-pro cornerback Darren Bland outside. At the end of the day, we'd love to have a guy that would allow us to keep Darren outside. We feel like he can shut down a side of the field. Heavy sports. Darren Bland outside. The Cowboys' all-pro corner, a player who in 2024 set the NFL record for interceptions returned for touchdowns in a single season, a player who has established himself as one of the best 5 cornerbacks in football, is being kept on the outside, not moved inside to nickel, not asked to do something that limits his range and impacts his effectiveness. Kept outside, where he dominates, where he is at his absolute best, where the Cowboys believe he can shut down an entire side of the field. That sounds great, but here is the implication that every Cowboys draft analyst immediately understood. If Bland stays outside, which is the right football decision, then the Cowboys need someone else to play nickel. And the nickel requirement that Schottenheimer described is one of the most demanding in all of football. I think Christian Parker was the one that said it. You have to be able to cover like a corner, blitz like a safety, and fit the run like a linebacker. Heavy sports. Cover like a corner, blitz like a safety, fit the run like a linebacker. 3 separate, demanding, elite-level requirements from one position. A player who has to be excellent at 3 different football disciplines simultaneously. And the Cowboys, based on Schottenheimer's own assessment, do not currently have that player on their roster, which means the draft, specifically one of their 2 first-round picks, has to find him, in a draft class that is already being asked to address defensive end, pass rusher, linebacker, and cornerback simultaneously. In a draft where the Cowboys are also supposedly open to taking a wide receiver at 12, if Carnell Tate or Jeremiah Love is available. Schottenheimer said at the University of Texas Pro Day, "You want to be prepared to do what we need to do on defense, but certainly we're not going to pass on a great offensive player if they're there at one of those spots, dogs by nature." Not going to pass on a great offensive player, draft natural and draft pure. Those words from the Cowboys head coach at a pro day for offensive players in the context of a draft where Dallas needs to rebuild a defense that ranked last in the league in scoring defense in 2025 are genuinely shocking in their implications because they suggest that the Cowboys, who fired their defensive coordinator mid-season, who gave up the most points in the NFL, who have a defensive personnel situation so dire that Schottenheimer himself says they need a nickel who can cover like a corner, blitz like a safety, and fit the run like a linebacker, are not necessarily going to use their first-round picks exclusively on defense. Two names come to mind if they're still on the board at 12, and I think this conversation gets serious fast if Carnell Tate or Jeremiah Love are available. What I really liked about the quote was it gives Dallas room to draft the board instead of drafting scared. So with Schottenheimer leaving the door open for offense, I see flexibility. Dogs by nature.
Carnell Tate at 12. The Ohio State receiver who has been projected to the Browns at pick 6 and to Dallas at pick 12 in multiple mock drafts. A receiver who, if Dallas takes him, would give them Lamb and Tate on the outside, while the Pickens situation plays itself out. A receiver who would give Dak Prescott, who is already training with CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens this offseason, according to Schottenheimer, a third legitimate option that covers the uncertainty around Pickens' long-term commitment. But taking a receiver at 12 when your defense just ranked last in the league in scoring defense and passing defense, when you just fired your defensive coordinator mid-season, when Schottenheimer just told reporters he needs a nickel who can do 3 elite things simultaneously and doesn't have one on the roster. That is the tension. The genuine, unresolvable, draft night will settle it tension that the 3 Schottenheimer bombshells of March 30th have created. Now let's step back and look at the full picture. Because the Cowboys, as complicated and as multi-directional and as simultaneously exciting and alarming as this offseason has been, are actually in a more interesting position than most of the national media gives them credit for. Jerry Jones said at the end of last season, "Brian is one of the reasons for our fans to be excited about our future and his first year. I think that you could say that he's experienced things that will, in my mind, make him better qualified to be the head coach in the coming years than he was when we hired him this time last year." Dogs by nature. Better qualified. Jones is saying, we went 7-9 and I am not panicking. Not because 7-9 is acceptable, not because missing the playoffs for the 3rd consecutive year is anything other than a serious organizational problem, but because the first-year head coach, the man who came in from the offensive coordinator role, who had no previous head coaching experience, who was thrown into a situation with a last-in-the-league defense and a complicated franchise quarterback and a media spotlight that is more intense than almost anywhere else in professional sports, handled it with a maturity and honesty and a culture-building intention that Jones believes is the foundation of something real. Schottenheimer has shown he isn't afraid to go for it on 4th down, trusting his players in key moments. Multiple Cowboys players praised his 4th down decision-making, with Tyler Smith saying, "Shout out to Schotty. I think that really shows the mentality of Schotty as a head coach and the trust that he has in us to get that yard." Dogs by nature. The players trust him. That is the foundation. The specific, irreplaceable, impossible to buy with coaching salary foundation of every successful NFL coaching tenure. And it has been established in 1 year, not perfectly, not without the 7-9 record and the defensive disaster and the Micah Parsons trade and all of it, but established. The players believe in the culture. They believe in the hard conversations. They believe in the trust that Schottenheimer shows when he goes for it on 4th down instead of punting. And that belief, combined with the organizational patience that Jones is publicly expressing, gives Dallas a runway that many 7-9 head coaches would not have. But the runway requires results. And the results in 2026 require solving 3 specific problems that the March 30th owners' meetings made unmistakably clear are still unresolved. Problem 1. George Pickens' contract. The Cowboys either get a deal done before training camp, or they manage the distraction of a star receiver on a franchise tag who may or may not show up, may or may not be fully engaged, and who represents both their most dangerous offensive weapon and their most significant organizational risk. The precedent in Dallas is not encouraging. The franchise has a history of these situations escalating rather than resolving, And Schottenheimer's carefully optimistic language, "GP loves it here, we love GP, we have plans for GP to be here for a long time," does not change the mathematical reality that Pickens has not signed anything and made no commitment to even attending voluntary workouts. Problem 2. Dak Prescott's readiness. Not physical readiness, mental and emotional readiness. The readiness that comes from processing a very public personal crisis and arriving at training camp genuinely, fully, undividedly locked in to the most important football season of his Cowboys career. Prescott is one of the most mentally tough quarterbacks in football. His comeback from the 2020 compound ankle fracture alone established that beyond any reasonable doubt. But managing a broken engagement, 2 daughters, and the tabloid aftermath while simultaneously trying to lead a franchise that has not won a playoff game since 2018 is a weight that even the strongest quarterbacks would feel. And Schottenheimer's reassurance that Prescott is in a good mental state is important, but it is also exactly what a head coach is supposed to say in that situation, regardless of what he privately believes. Problem 3. The defense. The last in the league defense. The defense that got the coordinator fired mid-season. The defense that is currently being rebuilt under new coordinator Christian Parker, with a personnel room that still has questions at nickel, at linebacker depth, and at the pass rush positions that were vacated when Micah Parsons was traded. And a draft class that Schottenheimer says the Cowboys are approaching with the mindset of drafting natural and pure, which means if Carnell Tate is sitting at 12, they might take him even though the defense desperately needs attention at multiple positions. In an ideal world, the Dallas Cowboys will take a pair of defensive players in the first round of the 2026 NFL Draft, and both of those players will make an immediate impact in year 1. ESPN.
Ideal world. But Schottenheimer just said they are not going to pass on a great offensive player if one is there, which means the ideal world and the draft board reality may not align, which means Cowboys fans could watch their team take Carnell Tate at 12 while the defensive needs that cost them 8 wins last season remain only partially addressed, which means the 2026 season could start with an offense that is as good as any in the NFC. Lamb, Pickens on the tag, potentially Tate, Prescott locked in, and a defense that is still being rebuilt one piece at a time under a new coordinator running a new system. That is the Cowboys on March 31st, 2026. 2 first-round picks, the George Pickens contract uncertainty, the Dak Prescott personal situation, the defensive rebuild, the Schottenheimer philosophy of drafting natural and pure, and a head coach standing at a podium in Phoenix delivering 3 separate statements that individually could each be managed, but that together paint a picture of an organization with more questions than answers at the exact moment when answers are most urgently needed. Cowboys fans cannot ignore this. The Pickens no assurance statement, the Prescott personal situation acknowledgement, the nickel corner revelation that opens the door to taking a receiver at 12 when defense is the most glaring need. 3 bombshells, 1 day, 1 head coach, and an entire fan base, one of the largest, most passionate, most nationally represented fan bases in professional sports, trying to figure out whether what they are seeing is the beginning of something genuinely exciting or the continuation of something that has been generating disappointment for far too long. 23 days. Pittsburgh. The draft that is supposed to provide the answers, that is supposed to address the defensive needs without sacrificing the offensive continuity, that is supposed to be the moment when the Schottenheimer era stops being a work in progress and starts being something the Cowboys and their fans can believe in completely. Brian Schottenheimer said everything and nothing at the same time on March 30th. He was warm and direct and optimistic and alarming all in the same breath. He revealed organizational preferences and created organizational questions with equal facility.
And he did it with the specific, unflappable confidence of a man who genuinely believes, who has Jerry Jones behind him, who has his players' trust, who has the culture he is building and the draft capital he is preparing to deploy, that the story ends well. Cowboys fans are not as certain as their head coach, and the 3 bombshells of March 30th are the reason why.